AI really became popular in November 2022 with the launch of ChatGPT. But the truth is the technology behind generative AI, large language models, has existed for many years. And in OCBC, we've been applying large language models since 2019. We use large language models, first generation models like BERT and FinBERT for doing things like reading the news to identify corporate bonds that might be at risk of default. We use it for things like credit early warning decisions. And we even use it for things like stock recommendations. So reading analyst reports, reading the news to kind of identify stocks that might be going up or going down. So OCBC actually had a lot of experience with these technologies anyway, going back to 2019. So when GPT-3 and 3.5 came along, we were already watching this space and we were already applying it to try and improve the models that we'd already built. ChatGPT for us was really more like an aha moment. Maybe not so much for the data scientists, but more for the business. Because I think it was the first time where the average business user was able to interact with AI with an interface that they could understand and realize the true power of AI. So for me, the greatest benefit of the generative AI boom has actually been the business and the change in mindset. Because in the old days when I worked with the business, we'd talk about AI and they really didn't understand behind the scenes what was going on. Only the data scientists knew. But now everyone has an understanding of what AI can do. And the questions I get from the business now are much, much sharper. So that's been great. Yeah, like we still in OCBC, we don't have the business building AI, but we give them tools where they can interact with the AI. So in OCBC, we have multiple tools. We've been very public about talking about OCBC GPT, where everyone in OCBC gets access to effectively ChatGPT, but within a secure OCBC environment through Microsoft Teams. And we're rolling that out at the moment to about 30,000 employees. So while you're not building the model, there are tools where you can interact with it. Another example would be Buddy. So Buddy is a chatbot we have in OCBC. Again, all OCBC employees can access it. Buddy can crawl the entire OCBC intranet, 150,000 pages, all the documents. And you can ask questions, find the information you need, and get very succinct responses. So we believe it's about putting AI in the hands of the users rather than having the users themselves actually build the AI. Yeah, I don't think we ever differentiated AI front office versus back office. We've always been looking across the organization to see where are the material processes where AI can add value. And that might mean AI for generating revenue, which is mostly front office. So things like hyper-personalization, helping customers make better investment decisions, helping OCBC make better investment decisions. That's more front office focused. Productivity, we would use AI in areas like the contact center, again, quite front office focused, as well as data center or operations, which are at the back. And then risk is the third area where we really apply it. Credit decisioning, fraud detection, AML, KYC, which are probably more on the back end. But we've really been looking fundamentally, what are the material processes that drive the bank, and how can we take AI and embed them into those processes? At the moment, generative AI is the shiny new toy, and everyone wants to be seen to be using it. But we don't take that approach. Just because we have a generative AI hammer, it doesn't mean that every problem is a nail that we need to use generative AI to solve. So if you look at my team, probably 80% of our work is still on what we call traditional AI. Using it for rational decision making. Which customer is going to buy a unit trust? Who's going to refinance their home loan? Who's going to leave OCBC this month? All of those problems are still solved by traditional AI. Generative AI is really for us helping us with the more right side of the brain tasks, the kind of creative decision making, which is a smaller subset of problems, to be honest. In fact, where we really see it is the two sides are going to start combining. You're going to use your generative AI to make sense of the unstructured data, your text, your video, your voice. You may turn that into structured signals, which then feeds into your traditional AI to actually make the decisions. So I think the two are complementary. Generative AI is not going to replace. A lot of information is unstructured, and while over the last 7-8 years, since the big data boom, we've all talked about unstructured data and our ability to analyze that data. It's always been relatively limited in the past. Generative AI now makes it very, very easy for us to take a call in the contact center, to transcribe that call, turn it into text, which I can then mine, and I can use those signals in other models. So these days, one of the greatest benefits of generative AI is it really unlocks that treasure trove of information. We don't see the skill sets being especially new. We've been applying deep learning for many, many years, NLP for many years, and generative AI to us is just an extension on that. Today, people are talking about prompt engineer being the job title of the future. I think right now, prompt engineer is hot, but we imagine in the future that AI is also going to take those kind of roles away. You're already seeing libraries start to appear like DPSY, where you just give it the data and the machine actually generates the prompt. So we think this focus on prompt engineering as a job will disappear in the future, and it will also become much, much more automated and much more kind of robust, because today prompt engineering is very kind of brittle, easy to break. Coming back to your ROI question, obviously we're a business. We're not a research team. So the job of my function is really to work with all of the business units across OCBC and say, how do we drive value from OCBC's data? So it's about adding value to the business and making sure that that value is much more than the cost of actually doing the analysis. So we spend a lot of time in OCBC sourcing use cases, and then we have a robust framework to basically prioritize those use cases. How long do I think it's going to take me to build that model? What do I think the financial return is if I actually do it? And that's how we prioritize what are the use cases we focus on, because we always have more use cases than people able to do it. We do our generative AI largely on-premise using open source tools. We're not using the cloud APIs for most of our use cases. And if you're using cloud APIs, then every single time you call the API, you're paying money. And so the cost would very rapidly rack up. But on-premise, we already have our own very large GPU infrastructure, so the incremental cost of us running a generative AI project is effectively zero. So for us, cost is less of a consideration. In fact, in many cases, generative AI actually makes our projects cheaper, because generative AI, because we're using a general model rather than having to custom train a model for every use case, we can actually do a lot of these use cases much faster than with traditional AI. So the cost in manpower terms is usually much less. So generative AI in some cases is actually reducing the cost of analytics on my side. I'll give you a great example, and I'll show you how generative AI allows you to move quickly. In OCBC, we have a tool called OCBC Wingman. And Wingman is our coding assistant that we built for our IT developers and for our data scientists. So it plugs into our coding environments, and when the IT team are writing code, Wingman is monitoring what they're doing, it understands, automatically produces the code. And so it also allows the developers to do things like debug the code, refactor the code, write the documentation, write the unit tests. And we've done in structured tests, we've shown that a developer with Wingman compared to a developer who doesn't have Wingman is 20% more efficient. And if you have 2,000 developers and you can make them 20% more efficient, that very rapidly becomes a significant sum. So that's actually one of the greatest use cases we've ever done. And back to my point about generative AI allowing you to move quickly. First version of Wingman we built and we deployed in 5 days. Internally, using open source tools at zero cost. We have 2,000 developers using it. Wingman writes around 500,000 lines of code every day, but I don't know the actual number myself. So where we see it, at the moment, generative AI, relatively early days, we're very much focusing on internal productivity use cases because we think that is the low-hanging fruit. We don't think it's fully ready for exposing to the customer because of the risk of hallucination. We'd like the controls around that area to be a bit stronger. But the way we're looking at it is, even internally, when you have a workforce of 30,000 employees, helping upskill and make those employees more productive and just removing the drudge work from their day is very, very important. So the way we're looking at it is basically equipping employees with a foundation set of capabilities that lifts every employee. So you mentioned their knowledge, the ability for an employee to search the knowledge base and get answers to their questions very quickly. The ability to generate minutes from a meeting and the actions automatically. The ability to drag and drop documents and easily ask questions against those documents. We think every employee will benefit from those. So we're building those as foundational capabilities everyone can use. Then we're focusing on specific roles. So we imagine that every role will have a co-pilot that effectively helps that role be more efficient. So Wingman, for example, is what we're doing with our IT team. For our compliance team, we're building one for sales surveillance to analyze all the sales calls and automatically find the anomalies there. Contact center, the ability to easily take the calls that come in, transcribe the call, summarize the call, categorize the call, work out the sentiment of the call, so they don't need to type these things into CRM, and we can reduce every call by 20 or 30 seconds. That's what we imagine is systematically going through all of the major roles in OCBC, even getting down to areas like legal. and saying, how can we transform your role using generative AI? We think there's huge benefits if you can do those types of things. Eventually, we're going to get to the customer. Once the whole hallucination thing has been robustly solved, then we'll get into the customer-facing use cases. And the big opportunity we see there is really in making the customer experience better. Giving customers a frictionless interaction. Rather than tapping on your phone, the ability just to speak into the phone and tell me what you need, and we immediately understand, are able to respond back, also with voice back to you, making it just more natural and frictionless. That's where I think things are going to change in the future. Definitely. And I'll give you an OCBC example. So I'll not talk about customer-facing chatbots yet. I'll talk about internal chatbots. So in OCBC, we have a chatbot for all of our employees called Buddy. And Buddy can answer, in the past, about 3,000 employee questions. He knew about 6,000 acronyms across the bank. But Buddy, people had to train Buddy. So the business would have to sit down and say, what are the questions that people might ask and what's the answer? And because of that, people don't want to do it because it takes a lot of time and effort with a traditional chatbot. We've now replaced that with a generative AI chatbot, so Buddy version 3. And so Buddy now just consumes all of the documents in OCBC, all of the internet pages. You ask your question, Buddy finds the relevant document, he summarizes the answer using generative AI and gives you a link to the document. So now Buddy is much more knowledgeable because he knows everything in OCBC and no one had to train him. So I think that the level is supercharged. It's a 10x improvement without having to do any additional training on the business side. So that's a win-win. We're lucky. We work in a jurisdiction where we have a very forward-looking regulator. So MAS back in 2018, they worked with all of the banks. We implemented the FEAT principles in AI: fairness, explainability, accountability, transparency. And that was really the guiding principle for AI deployments across the industry. And MAS worked with the banks to make it a pragmatic, actionable framework. Since then, we've moved on. We've now done the Veritas framework. Again, all of the banks working with MAS to embed fairness into AI. And so if you saw at the FinTech Festival on Wednesday, MAS announced Project Mindforge. And Project Mindforge is the regulatory framework for generative AI in financial services in Singapore. So once again, MAS is actually working hand in hand with the banks to say, how can we do this in a controlled environment, but without stifling the innovation as well? So I actually think in Singapore, we're actually perfectly placed. We're not trying to shut down generative AI. We're saying, how can we do it, but do it in a controlled manner, which I think is absolutely the right way to do it. Yeah, we do have a model management platform, MMP, which we built ourselves. And MMP is where we manage all the models, so I understand what's in production, who approved it, when was it last refreshed. But it also allows me to monitor every day, is the model accurate, is it drifting? Automatically notifies me if it's not. And it applies the MAS Veritas framework, so every time we refresh a model, we do fairness testing. So I think MMP is a good framework for us to be able to manage our models. I think it comes down to materiality. It's all about the materiality of the model going wrong. And if you look at the places where we're applying generative AI today, we're purposely not using it for highly material models. We're using it for things like coding, where there's still a human in the loop checking the code that's produced by the machine before it then gets used. At that level, I don't think it's essential you know exactly how the model is working. That's one of the reasons we're not getting into the material use cases yet, because we want stronger frameworks to be in place first before we get there.